"You worthless failure. Sit out there or get out." My father spat at his retirement party. When I refused, Dad slapped me in front of 200 guests. I smiled and whispered, "You just lost me." 3 weeks later, "Hello everyone. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 34 years old, and at my own father's retirement party, in front of 200 of his most esteemed colleagues, he slapped me across the face and called me a worthless failure. Before I tell you how that single moment of humiliation led to me systematically and legally dismantling his entire empire and owning the very legacy he tried to hide me from, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can travel. The Oakwood Country Club smelled exactly the way you'd imagine. A cloying mix of old money, damp wool, and the faint, sweet scent of expensive perfume. It was my father's natural habitat. For one night, this ballroom, with its glittering chandeliers and army of silent waiters, was the center of the universe for the state's medical elite. Dr. Richard Carter, a titan of surgery, was finally laying down his scalpel. This wasn't just a party. It was a coronation celebrating a lifetime of perceived perfection. I shouldn't have gone. Every rational part of my brain knew it was a mistake, but a stubborn, foolish part of me held onto a sliver of hope. I thought, just maybe, with his career officially over, he would finally have the space to see me, not as the family's black sheep, but simply as his son. To prove my good intentions, I'd brought a gift. A vintage 1965 Rolex, the year he graduated from medical school. It had cost me a small fortune, a piece of my own hard-won success that I wanted to offer as a bridge. That bridge was never even built. I was intercepted before my shoes could touch the ballroom carpet. My mother, Eleanor, glided towards me. Her smile stretched so tight I was afraid it would crack her porcelain foundation. "Michael, dear," she murmured, her fingers wrapping around my bicep like a velvet vice. Her eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the room, calculating social trajectories. "So glad you could make it." My father appeared at her side, a thundercloud in a tuxedo. His cold, blue eyes performed a familiar, dismissive sweep over my custom-tailored suit, my very presence. "Your brother has some very important colleagues here tonight, Michael," he began, his voice a low growl meant only for me. "The dean of his hospital is here. We cannot have distractions." The word hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. "A distraction?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You know precisely what I mean," he spat. "The garden patio is quite lovely this time of year. You can have a drink out there. We'll have a waiter bring you a plate." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. Sit outside, like a misbehaving child, like an embarrassing relative to be kept out of sight. Also, the pristine image of his perfect son, Dr. Thomas Carter, could remain untarnished by my shadow. And in that moment, something deep inside me, a spring that had been coiled tighter and tighter for 34 years, finally broke. I straightened my shoulders, pulling my arm from my mother's grasp with a finality that made her flinch. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it echoed in the space between us like a cannon shot. My father's face, usually a mask of controlled superiority, began to flood with a deep, ugly red. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I am a guest at this party, just like everyone else. I will not be hidden in the garden." "You worthless failure." The roar ripped from his throat, loud enough to silence the nearby chatter. Heads turned. Smiles froze. "Sit out there or get out." I didn't back down. I held his gaze, letting him see the end of his power in my eyes. And that's when he did it. He drew back his hand, the one that had performed miracles on operating tables, and he slapped me. The sound was sharp, ugly, and absolute. It sliced through the murmuring crowd, followed by a sudden, profound silence. The sting on my cheek was a branding iron, but the real pain was the cold, dead finality in my chest. 200 pairs of eyes, a jury of his peers, stared at me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. A strange, serene calm washed over me. I smiled. A real smile, I think, but it felt cold and sharp on my face. I leaned in, invading his space, and whispered so only he and my horrified mother could hear. "You just lost me." I turned my back on them, on the gift I still held in my hand, on the entire charade. As I walked towards the exit, the sea of stunned faces parted for me. I could feel their stares on my back, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I ended up at the Riverside Cafe, a 24-hour diner that smelled of coffee and quiet desperation. It was a universe away from the country club. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah with tired but kind eyes, noticed the angry red handprint blooming on my cheek. She didn't ask. She just poured me a mug of steaming ginger tea instead of my usual black coffee. "Looks like you could use something warmer tonight," she said softly. That small gesture of kindness from a complete stranger was the first thing that had felt real all night. And as I wrapped my cold hands around the warm mug, I knew this wasn't just an ending. This was a declaration of war. One moment of violence can unlock a lifetime of quiet wounds. Sitting in that cracked vinyl booth at the Riverside, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, I wasn't just feeling the sting on my cheek. I was feeling the echo of 1,000 other slights, 1,000 other dismissals that had shaped the man I had become. The slap was merely the physical manifestation of a 34-year-old truth. In my father's world, I was a ghost, a disappointment he was forced to acknowledge. My mind, unbidden, replayed a scene from 10 years prior. My college graduation. I was the first Carter in 2 generations to forsake medicine for the digital world of computer science. Felt like a betrayal to them, but to me it was a calling. Logic, code, creation, it was a language my soul understood. I graduated with high honors, my name called out to a smattering of polite applause. I stood on the great lawn afterwards, a sea of beaming families embracing their graduates, and I searched for my own. I finally found them near the edge of the crowd, looking like they were waiting for a bus. My father was pointedly checking his watch, a heavy gold piece that seemed to measure his impatience. My mother was fanning herself with the program, her expression strained. And my brother, Thomas, already a year into his pre-med program, was texting, completely disengaged. "There you are," my father said when I reached them, clapping me on the shoulder with a hollow thud. "Well done, son." His eyes were already scanning the path to the parking lot. I held up my diploma, the leather case feeling flimsy and childish in my hands. "I got the award for best thesis in the department." "That's nice, Michael," my mother said, planting a quick, dry kiss on the air beside my cheek. "We're so proud. Now we really must be going. Thomas has a networking dinner with the Dean of Medicine. It's a very important opportunity for him. You understand." I didn't. I understood that my once-in-a-lifetime achievement was merely a checkbox on their list for the day, a minor inconvenience before the main event, polishing the crown of their chosen son. They were gone before the dean had even finished his congratulatory speech. I was left alone in my cap and gown, a ghost at my own celebration, the proud words on my diploma feeling like a foreign language. That feeling, that profound sense of being invisible, became the engine of my life. For years, I think it drove me out of spite. Every success, every contract, every milestone my tech company achieved was a silent rebuttal to their dismissal. I built a fortress of success around my wounded heart. I remembered another scene, one that I clung to like a life raft. 5 years ago, in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in Silicon Valley. I was pitching my cybersecurity startup, the one built on an algorithm I'd practically bled for. My life savings were gone, I was drowning in debt, and the 2 venture capitalists across the table held my entire future in their hands. After an hour of me talking, my voice raw with passion and exhaustion, the lead investor, a formidable woman named Annette, leaned back. She didn't smile. She just stared at me, her gaze so intense it felt like she was x-raying my soul. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then she spoke. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice crisp and decisive, "your algorithm isn't just good. It's revolutionary. It will change the way financial institutions handle data security." They invested $5 million. But it was her words, not the money, that changed me. The validation from a stranger, a professional who saw my value without the filter of family history, was like a downpour of rain on a parched land. It was the moment I stopped needing them to see me. It was the moment I truly started to see myself. Back in the present, I finished my tea, left a 20 on the table for Sarah, and went home to my empty, silent apartment. For 3 days, my phone was a constant assault. My mother's voicemails were a masterclass in emotional whiplash, shifting from syrupy pleas, "Michael, darling, my heart is broken," to sharp-edged guilt. "How could you do this to your father, after everything?" Thomas sent a barrage of texts. "Stop being so dramatic. Just apologize to Dad. You're tearing this family apart." I read them all, a strange detachment settling over me. They weren't trying to understand. They were trying to manage a PR crisis. I was a loose cannon that needed to be brought back into the fold, silenced, and put back in my box. I ignored every call, every message. The silence was my first real act of defiance. On the 4th day, the war came to my doorstep. My real doorstep. My assistant's voice crackled over the intercom in my office. "Mr. Carter? A Mrs. Eleanor Carter is in the lobby to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." "Send her in," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil in my gut. My mother strode into my office, her expensive handbag clutched like a weapon. She was a general inspecting enemy territory. Her eyes swept over the panoramic view of the city from the 30th floor, the sleek, modern furniture, the quiet hum of a successful enterprise. I saw a flicker of genuine shock, of grudging respect, before she expertly masked it. "Michael," she began, her tone that of a disappointed headmistress, "this foolishness has gone on long enough. Your father is beside himself. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed the entire family." I let the accusation hang in the air. I swiveled my chair to face her fully, my hands resting calmly on the polished surface of my desk. "He assaulted me, Mom," I said, my voice level and clear, "in front of 200 people. She waved a dismissive, manicured hand. "Oh, don't be so theatrical. He was under a lot of stress. You provoked him, you know you did. You have always been difficult." There it was, the cornerstone of the Carter family justice system. You provoked him. You apologize. We move on. It was a script I had been forced to play my entire life. But the man sitting across from her now had rewritten his part. "No," I said. "I'm not doing that this time. Michael, I am your mother, and I am telling you to stop this nonsense and come home. You will apologize to your father, and we will put this behind us." "And he is my father," I countered, my voice hardening. "A father who chose to humiliate and strike his son rather than afford him a basic level of respect. This isn't about me being difficult, Mom. This is about you two being terrified of what the gossips at the country club are saying." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "And since we're being honest, I'm sure you're also worried about the club's extensive security system. High-definition cameras covering every public space, including the entrance hall. Every word, every gesture. It was all perfectly recorded." The blood drained from her face. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled. Evidence. Proof. These were concepts she couldn't dismiss or manipulate. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. In that moment, she wasn't seeing her disappointing son. She was seeing an adversary. "You wouldn't," she finally whispered, her voice trembling with impotent rage. "Don't test me," I replied softly. She stood there, defeated, the authority she always wielded now utterly useless. Without another word, she turned and stormed out, the click of the door sealing her retreat. As I watched her go, another memory surfaced, one I had long tried to suppress. Me, at 20, trying to show my father a critical security flaw I'd found in the patient portal for his medical group. "Dad, this is serious," I had insisted, showing him the lines of code on my laptop. A moderately skilled hacker could access patient records. He had laughed that booming, condescending laugh of his. Michael, what could you possibly know about the complexities of medical data privacy? Stick to your video games, son. He never fixed it. A year later, a small article in the local paper mentioned a minor data breach at Carter Medical Group. It was quickly buried. He never acknowledged I had been right. He let his pride endanger the people he was sworn to protect. And sitting there, high above the city in my fortress of success, everything crystallized. The problem wasn't just his cruelty to me. The problem was his arrogance. It was a fatal flaw, a cancer at the very heart of his precious legacy. And I knew, with a terrifying clarity, what I had to do next. It was time to schedule a surgery. The moment the door clicked shut on my mother's retreat, the emotional storm inside me subsided, leaving behind a landscape of chilling clarity. The objective was no longer to win an argument or to get an apology. The objective was to win the war. And this war wouldn't be fought with raised voices or hurtful words. It would be fought on my turf. The cold, unforgiving battlefield of business, strategy, and leveraged assets. My first call was to Jennifer Reed. Jen had been my company's lawyer since I was operating out of my garage. She was a small, unassuming woman in her late 40s, but behind her glasses was a mind like a razor blade and the tenacity of a wolverine. She understood me, and more importantly, she believed in me. "Let me guess," she said, her voice dry and devoid of pleasantries. "This isn't about the new server farm lease." "No, Jen," I replied, leaning back in my chair and staring at the city skyline. "I have a new project. It's personal. I want you to start a deep dive investigation into Carter Medical Group." A beat of silence on the other end. "Your father's practice? Michael, is everything okay? That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? I want you to find out. I want everything. Financials, debt load, lines of credit, patient reviews, staff turnover, vendor contracts. I want a complete, unvarnished picture of the business. And Jen, it needs to be completely discreet." "Discreet is my default setting," she assured me. "But this is a different animal. Private medical practices are tangled messes of partnerships, private equity, and Byzantine regulations. To do this right, to do it fast, and to do it without leaving footprints, we need more than just a lawyer. We need a specialist." "Who do you recommend?" I asked, trusting her judgment implicitly. "His name is Marcus Sterling," Jennifer said, and I could hear a note of grim admiration in her voice. "He's an M&A guy, mergers and acquisitions. His specialty is distressed assets in the healthcare sector. In the circles he runs in, they call him the surgeon. When a company is sick, he's the one they call to either save it or to cut it up for parts with clinical precision. He's ruthlessly effective, prohibitively expensive, and the absolute best there is." The irony was not lost on me. "Hire him," I said without a moment's hesitation. "Tell him money is no object. I want the surgeon." The initial report from Sterling's team was on my secure server less than a week later. It was a digital tombstone, 100 pages of charts, graphs, and dense legal analysis. The executive summary on the first page told the whole story. Carter Medical Group was not just struggling. It was actively dying. My father, the genius surgeon, had been a catastrophically poor businessman. His retirement and Thomas's subsequent ascension to leadership had accelerated the decline. The practice was drowning in debt, patient numbers were in free fall, and their operating costs were absurdly high. But it was a single, recurring line item that made me sit up straight. A significant monthly payment, labeled simply as consulting fees, was being funneled to a numbered LLC. A few hours of work by Jennifer's team revealed the sole proprietor of that LLC, Dr. Thomas Carter. My brother, the golden child, was systematically bleeding the family business dry, paying himself a massive, off-the-books bonus while the practice hurtled towards bankruptcy. He was flaunting a new Porsche and a top-of-the-line watch, all while the nurses and administrative staff were likely living in fear of layoffs. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of it was breathtaking. This was my leverage. This was the crack in their armor. But for Sterling, it wasn't enough. We met in his office, a sterile, minimalist space that felt more like a laboratory than a law firm. Sterling himself was tall and unervingly still, a man who seemed to conserve every ounce of energy for maximum impact. He didn't bother with small talk. "The financial malfeasance is sloppy, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice a flat monotone. "It's leverage, yes, but it's a symptom. We think the underlying disease is more severe." He gestured to a file on the large screen on the wall. "We pulled the group's professional liability insurance records for the past 15 years. Standard procedure. Most of it is minor slip-and-falls billing disputes. But then there's this." He clicked, and a document filled the screen. It was a claim from 7 years ago. A massive payout settled out of court and sealed so tight it was practically hermetically sealed. "A payout of this magnitude for a private practice is a 5-alarm fire," Sterling explained, his eyes fixed on the numbers. "This isn't someone tripping over a loose carpet tile. This is a catastrophic event. A major malpractice suit that was buried with extreme prejudice." My mind flashed back again to the data breach I'd warned my father about. His hubris. His refusal to listen to his video game-obsessed son. Had that arrogance led to this? Had it cost someone more than just their data? "It's Thomas," I said, the words tasting like poison. "He was a resident back then, still learning. He made a mistake." "It's the most logical hypothesis," Jennifer agreed, looking over the documents. "A rookie mistake, and the powerful father steps in to make it go away." "I need to know for sure," I said, my voice hard as granite. "I want to know what happened. I want the patient's name. I want to know how they were silenced. I want every single detail." This had escalated beyond a family feud or a business acquisition. If they had harmed someone and buried it, this was a moral crusade. While Sterling's team of forensic accountants and investigators began to chip away at the 7-year-old wall of silence, the present intruded once more. This time, it was my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister and the family's designated steamroller of sentimentality. "Michael, darling," she cooed into the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "I was just devastated to hear about the little misunderstanding at the party. You know how your father gets, the pressure he's under. Your mother is just heartbroken, you know. Family is the most important thing, Michael. We should all have dinner. For your mother's sake. Let's just put this all behind us." I listened to her well-rehearsed monologue, the same emotional blackmail she had used for years. But this time, I could hear the tinny note of desperation beneath the honey. They hadn't called her to mediate. They'd called her in as an asset, a tool to bring their wayward son back in line. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice polite but cold. "But I'm afraid I'm quite busy at the moment. Please give my best to Uncle Robert." I hung up before she could launch into her next volley of guilt. The final piece of the puzzle, the key that would unlock everything, came from Sterling 2 days later. He didn't email. He called my private line. "We found her," he said, his voice grim. "Her?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "The Jane Doe from the malpractice suit. We have her name. More than that, we have a source. Someone from inside who is willing to talk." "Who?" "I think you know," Sterling said. "There's only one person who could have been there, who knew the truth, and who would have the access to get us the unredacted records. We have the complete file, Michael. The original incident report, before it was revised. It's ironclad, and what it contains, it's far worse than we imagined." I stood by the window of my office, the phone pressed hard against my ear, listening as Sterling laid out the cold, brutal facts. When he finished, a profound silence filled the room. The rage I had felt before was a hot, explosive thing. This was different. This was a black hole, cold and dense, consuming all light and emotion. The betrayal was so absolute, so fundamental, it rewrote the entire history of my life. I took one long, shuddering breath, the ice reforming in my veins. The objective was no longer just clear. It was righteous. "Sterling," I said, my voice hollowed out, devoid of all feeling. "Stop investigating. You have what you need. Prepare a formal offer to acquire 100% of Carter Medical Group." Use the Orion Holdings shell. I want it on their desk by the end of the week. No negotiations. No compassion. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had made landfall, and I was its unwavering, unforgiving eye. The days that followed were a quiet, intense symphony of strategic maneuvering. While my family was likely wringing their hands, wondering why their usual arsenal of emotional warfare was failing, I was moving pawns and knights on a chessboard they didn't know existed. The shell company, Orion Holdings, was now a fully fledged legal entity, a ghost with a bank account, ready to haunt them. But this phase was about more than just legal documents and financial models. It was about fortifying my own resolve. Sterling was the architect of the attack, but I needed the moral certainty to see it through. That certainty hinged on one person, Nurse Maria Sanchez. She had been my father's right hand for 3 decades, a woman whose loyalty I had assumed was absolute. She was the gatekeeper of the truth. Jennifer was the one who went to see her, not at the clinic where she would be guarded, but at her small, immaculately kept house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. I waited in a nondescript car down the block, my own presence too fraught with history. This mission required Jennifer's delicate, incisive touch. She was gone for over an hour. When she got back in the car, her expression was somber. "She's terrified," Jennifer reported, her voice low and torn. "To her, your father is a great man who made a terrible mistake to protect his family. Her loyalty to him is like a religion." My heart sank. "So she won't talk." "I didn't push her on the past," Jennifer said, turning to look at me. Her eyes were sharp. "I made it about the present. I made it about her conscience as a nurse. I showed her what Thomas is doing now." Jennifer had compiled a small, devastating file. Not just the financial fraud, but patient complaints we'd uncovered about his dismissive, arrogant bedside manner. More damningly, 3 recent cases where he had prescribed the wrong dosage of common medications. Nothing life-threatening, but clear evidence of a pattern of carelessness, of a doctor who simply wasn't paying attention. "I laid it all out in front of her," Jennifer continued. "The file, the evidence." Then I asked her one question. "Maria, you helped Richard cover up one tragic mistake from 7 years ago, a mistake that injured one person. Are you going to stand by silently while his incompetent son makes the next mistake? And the one after that? How many patients have to pay the price for your loyalty?" That was the move. It reframed the entire equation. This was no longer about betraying a past loyalty to a man. It was about upholding her professional duty to protect patients, now and in the future. It was an appeal to the very core of her identity as a caregiver. We drove away, leaving her with that impossible choice. For 2 days there was nothing, an agonizing silence. I started to believe we had failed, that her loyalty, however misguided, was unbreakable. I barely slept, pacing my apartment, the moral weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. Was this justice or was it just elaborate revenge? Then, on the 3rd night, an anonymous, encrypted email landed in Jennifer's inbox. It contained a single, password-protected PDF. A minute later, a second email arrived. It contained only the password, for Elena, the name of the patient from 7 years ago. Jennifer forwarded it to me. I opened it in the dead of night, alone in my office, the city lights below seeming to blur and swim. It was Maria's sworn affidavit, a detailed, gut-wrenching, minute-by-minute account of what had really happened that day. I read it, and the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't my father who had made the mistake. Not directly. Thomas, a nervous resident at the time, was supposed to be administering the anesthetic for a routine procedure. He had gotten distracted, chatting with another nurse, laughing at a joke, and had misread the dosage. A simple, stupid, catastrophic error. It was my father, the great Dr. Carter, who saw the patient's vital signs begin to crash on the monitor. He saw the mistake. He knew what had happened. He had a choice. Report it, as he was ethically and legally bound to do. Face the board, the lawsuits. Thomas's career would be over. The Carter name would be tarnished. Or, he chose or. He stepped in, stabilized the patient with his brilliant skill, and then, in the official report, he fabricated a story. An unexpected, one-in-a-million allergic reaction to the anesthetic. He, the esteemed surgeon, blamed the patient's own body for the near-fatal error of his favored son. The patient, a young woman named Elena Rojas, survived, but with permanent, debilitating nerve damage. The huge, secret settlement was the price of her and her family's silence. My blood ran cold. The man I had spent my life trying to earn a crumb of affection from wasn't just a cruel father. He was a criminal, a man who had sacrificed his sacred oath on the altar of his own pride. The slap, the insults, the years of being made to feel less than, they were all symptoms of this deeper sickness. His inability to love me was tied to his inability to admit failure, in himself or in the son he saw as an extension of his own perfection. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed Marcus Sterling. "We have it?" I said, my voice hollow. All the anger burned out of me, leaving only a core of cold, hard purpose. "The affidavit. It's ironclad. This changes the calculus," Sterling said, his voice for once holding a trace of something other than professional detachment. "This isn't just a hostile takeover anymore. This is a public health issue." "I know," I said. "Make the offer. It's time to excise the cancer." The boardroom at Carter Medical Group was a time capsule of my father's ego. Dark, heavy wood, a carpet so thick it muffled all sound, and an oppressive silence that had always felt, to me, like a judgment. The long, polished mahogany table was a battlefield where he had won 100 negotiations, and at its head, he now sat enthroned. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes thinner than I remembered, but the familiar mask of arrogant superiority was firmly in place. To his right, my mother, Eleanor, her posture ramrod straight, a brittle smile pinned to her lips. Beside her, my brother Thomas, looking like a cat that had just swallowed a canary, already picturing his new life, free from work and accountability. They thought this was their victory, their escape. For the past week, Ry4ns Holdings, my faceless, anonymous shell company, had been their salvation. A mysterious, deep-pocketed investor had miraculously appeared, offering a generous price to absorb their failing practice. They didn't know who was behind it. More importantly, they hadn't bothered to ask. They were simply grateful to be cashing out, their reputations seemingly intact, their dark secrets, they believed, safely buried. I was not in the room. Not yet. I was in an adjacent office watching a live, high-definition video feed. In my place sat Marcus Sterling, my impassive angel of death, flanked by 2 junior associates. They sat across the vast table from my family, a mountain of closing documents separating them like a barricade. "If you'll just sign the final page of the transfer agreement, Dr. Carter," Sterling said, his voice as flat and polished as the table's surface. "The transaction will be complete. The funds will be wired to your designated account by close of business today." My father took a deep, performative breath, playing the part of the patriarch reluctantly letting go of his life's work for the good of his family. "A difficult day," he announced to the room, his voice resonating with false gravity, "but a necessary one. I trust you will take good care of my legacy." With a grand flourish, he signed his name. My mother signed hers, her movements stiff and precise. Thomas scribbled his signature with ill-disguised glee. It was done. The trap was sprung. Sterling gathered the signed pages, his movements economical and precise. He tapped them into a neat pile. "The transaction is now legally complete," he confirmed. "Carter Medical Group, its assets and its liabilities, are now a wholly owned subsidiary of Ry4ns Holdings." My father nodded, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Excellent. Well, I suppose that concludes our business here." He made a move to push his chair back from the table. "Not quite," Sterling said. The 2 words, delivered in his calm monotone, stopped my father cold. "There is one final formality. The board of Ry4ns Holdings believes in a hands-on ownership style. The new owner insists on being present for the formal transition of leadership. He is waiting to be introduced." A flash of annoyance crossed my father's face. The great Dr. Carter was not accustomed to being made to wait. "Well, where is he? Let's get this over with." Sterling's gaze shifted towards the boardroom door. "He's right here." That was my cue. I opened the heavy oak door and walked in. The effect was instantaneous and profound. It was like watching a film suddenly freeze, crack, and shatter. I saw the smug relief on my brother's face instantly curdle into a mask of slack-jawed, bovine disbelief. I watched my mother's polite, socialite smile freeze and then crumble, the color draining from her face, leaving her pearls to stand out against her suddenly pallid skin. But my eyes, my attention, my entire being was focused on my father. His face was a rapid, ugly slideshow of emotions. First, simple confusion. Then, dawning, horrified recognition. Then, a surge of pure, apoplectic rage. And finally, beneath it all, the cold, reptilian understanding of an apex predator who has just realized he's walked into a cage. "You!" he breathed, the word a venomous whisper. "What is this? What have you done?" I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the table, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "It's called a leveraged buyout, Dad," I said, my voice unervingly calm. "It's what happens when a company is so profoundly mismanaged, so deep in debt, and so morally bankrupt that it becomes vulnerable. A savvy investor comes along and acquires it for pennies on the dollar. That investor is me. You snake." Thomas finally found his voice, sputtering. "This is illegal. It has to be. We'll sue you into the ground." I didn't even grant him a glance. I just looked at Sterling. "Marcus." Sterling, without looking away from my father, coolly turned his laptop around to face the head of the table. On the screen, in stark black and white, was the first page of Nurse Maria's sworn affidavit. "Before you contemplate litigation, Dr. Carter," Sterling said, his voice dropping a degree colder, "perhaps we should have a frank discussion about the real reason for the group's long-term financial distress. It didn't start with your son's mismanagement. It started 7 years ago with a patient named Elena Rojas, and a catastrophic malpractice event that was deliberately and criminally covered up by Dr. Richard Carter, in order to protect the career of his son, Thomas Carter, who was the direct cause of the patient's near-fatal reaction to anesthesia. The silence in the room became a physical presence, pressing in on all of us. It was broken only by a small, strangled sob from my mother. My father stared at the screen as if it were a gorgon, his face ashen, his body rigid. The grand mask of the infallible surgeon was gone. In his place was a scared, guilty old man, exposed and cornered. "This meeting is over," my father snarled, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to assert an authority he no longer possessed. "Get out, all of you." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," I said, having circled the table to stand directly behind the ornate chair he had occupied for decades. "I own this company. I own this building. I own this table." I leaned down, my voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "And you are the one who is going to get out." From the inside pocket of my suit jacket, I produced a single, folded piece of paper and slid it across the polished wood until it rested in front of him. It was a one-page summary. On the left, a bullet-pointed list of Thomas's financial fraud. On the right, the key, damning excerpts from the malpractice cover-up. "Here is my one and only offer," I announced to the room, my voice resonating in the tomb-like quiet. "You will all walk away. You will sign non-disclosure agreements so ironclad that you won't be able to even whisper the name Carter Medical Group in your sleep. In exchange for your immediate cooperation and total silence, Orion Holdings will decline to pursue federal charges for financial fraud against Thomas. Nor will it forward this rather comprehensive file detailing your malpractice, perjury, and obstruction of justice to the American Medical Association." I leaned down again, my face inches from his, our roles from the party now perfectly, beautifully reversed. "You tried to hide me in the garden," I whispered. "Instead, I'm evicting you from your castle. You have exactly 1 hour to clear out your office." I straightened up, taking one last look at my broken, pathetic family. Thomas was staring at the table, his face white with a terror so pure it was almost pitiable. My mother was no longer looking at me. She was looking at my father, her eyes filled with a dawning horror and something I had never, ever seen her direct at him before. Utter contempt. And my father. He just stared at me, his eyes burning with a helpless, impotent hatred. The great surgeon had been surgically, expertly, and permanently dismantled. And I had been the one holding the scalpel. The hour of their exile was one of the strangest of my life. I didn't stay to watch the pathetic spectacle of them packing their personal effects. I instructed the building's head of security, a stoic ex-cop named Frank, to escort them out precisely at the 60-minute mark. Sterling and Jennifer, my loyal generals, remained behind to handle the legal surrender. I went to what was now my office, my father's former throne room, and simply sat in the large leather chair, which felt both alien and perfectly fitting. It didn't feel like a victory celebration. It felt like the sterile, quiet aftermath of a life-saving, limb-severing surgery. My first visitor, as expected, was Thomas. He didn't knock. He just shuffled in, his expensive suit looking rumpled and ill-fitting on his defeated frame. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a pathetic hangdog look that made my stomach churn. He couldn't bring himself to meet my eyes, focusing instead on a point on the obscenely plush Persian rug. "Michael," he mumbled, his voice thick, "you can't do this to us. To Dad." "It's already done, Thomas," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I didn't even look up from my laptop. "The money, the consulting fees. Look, it was a mistake. I got in over my head. I can pay it back. I'll get a loan," he stammered, his words tumbling out in a desperate, disorganized heap. "This was never about the money you stole," I said calmly. The words made him look up, his eyes wide with a genuine, foolish confusion. "This is about the fact that you are dangerously incompetent. It's about the fact that you see patients as inconveniences and the family business as your personal piggy bank. It's about a woman named Elena Rojas, whose life you ruined because you were too busy telling a joke to do your job properly." His face went chalk white. I didn't. Dad handled all of that." "Precisely," I said, finally closing my laptop and giving him my full attention. "Dad always handled it. Your whole life he's handled it. He built a pedestal of lies for you and diligently swept every one of your mistakes and failures under it. Well, today, I kicked the pedestal out, and I'm turning on the lights to let everyone see the filth you've been hiding in." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the massive desk. "Here are your two options. They are not negotiable. Option A. You sign this letter of resignation, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. In return, I will give you a severance package that will keep a roof over your head for 6 months while you find a new way to be a disappointment. You will sign the NDA, and you will vanish from my life and from this industry. Option B. I fire you for cause. I forward the evidence of your financial fraud to the IRS, and I hand-deliver the complete malpractice file, including Nurse Maria's affidavit, to the state medical board. You won't just lose your license, Thomas. You will almost certainly go to prison." He stared at me, his mouth agape, a fish drowning in air. He was searching my face for a third option, a loophole, a sign of weakness he could exploit. He found nothing but a locked door and a stone wall. "You have until 5 p.m. to have your signed resignation on this desk," I said, turning my attention back to my computer. A clear dismissal. "Now get out of my office." He stumbled out without another word, a broken man-child finally forced to face a consequence. The golden child had finally, irrevocably, tarnished. My next visitor was far more predictable and far more volatile. An hour later, just as Frank from security was politely informing him his time was up, my father stormed into the office. There was no pleading, no shock, only a tsunami of pure, undiluted rage. "How dare you?" he roared, his powerful voice, the one that commanded operating rooms, bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. "After everything I have done for you, everything this family has provided for you, everything you've done for me?" I asked, rising slowly from my chair to meet him head-on. You have done nothing for me. You did everything for Thomas. You did everything for your own monstrous ego, for the preservation of the precious Carter name. I built this practice from the dirt with my own 2 hands, he bellowed, his face turning a blotchy, dangerous shade of purple. This is my legacy. You have no right to touch it. That's when my own iron control finally fractured, not into rage, but into a cold, sharp-edged fury. Your legacy? I shot back, my voice rising to cut through his. Your legacy is a lie. Your legacy is a young woman who can't feel her own hands because your favorite son was too arrogant to pay attention, and you were too much of a coward to admit it. Your legacy is fraud, perjury, and a decade of lies. I strode around the desk until I was inches from him, invading his space, forcing him to see me not as a boy, but as the man who had undone him. You want to talk about rights? Let's talk about the slap. You felt you had the right to publicly humiliate me, to physically assault me, because my very existence offended your sense of order. That slap, Dad, it wasn't just about me. It was the perfect metaphor for your entire life. Your belief that you are above reproach, above consequences. You thought you could hide your son's crimes. You thought you could hide me in the garden. You thought you could hide anything that wasn't perfect. I lowered my voice, the heat of my anger concentrating into a laser beam. You didn't just slap me. You slapped every single patient who ever put their trust in you. You slapped your own Hippocratic oath until it was black and blue. You chose your pathetic pride over their safety. So don't you ever talk to me about legacy again. I pointed a trembling finger toward the door. I'm not destroying your legacy. I am saving it from the man who ruined it. Now, for the final time, get out. He stood there, panting, his rage finally extinguished by the brutal, undeniable truth. He had no more words. The great Dr. Richard Carter, the man who always had the final, cutting remark, was finally utterly silent. He gave me one last look, his eyes filled with a hatred so profound it was almost a physical force. Then he turned, and with the shuffling gait of a defeated old man, he walked out of the office, out of the building, and out of my life for good. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the ringing silence of my new kingdom. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind of controlled demolition and painstaking reconstruction. It was the most exhausted and the most energized I had ever been. The name Carter Medical Group was the first casualty. I had it legally dissolved, striking it from the public record. It was a name built on a foundation of lies, and I wanted it returned to dust. In its place, Northwood Medical Center was born. A new name, a new logo, and a new, non-negotiable philosophy, which I had printed and framed in every single office. The patient first. Always. No exceptions. This was no mere cosmetic rebranding. With Marcus Sterling's ruthless efficiency handling the financial restructuring and my own tech expertise driving the operational overhaul, we tore the practice down to its very studs. We ripped out the old, clunky servers and antiquated software. I personally oversaw the implementation of a new, state-of-the-art, and, most importantly, completely secure electronic health record system, the kind of integrated system I had tried to explain to my father more than a decade ago. We didn't just retrain the staff, we reinstilled a culture. We established new, transparent protocols for everything from billing to patient feedback, creating a system of accountability where there had once only been fear. There were, of course, personnel changes. Thomas's signed letter of resignation was on my desk by 4:59 p.m. on that first, fateful day. A handful of the senior doctors and administrators who had been too comfortable, too complicit in the old culture of cronyism and silence, were given generous severance packages and shown the door. But I discovered there were good people there, talented professionals who had been stifled, keeping their heads down and just trying to do their jobs in a toxic environment. I promoted Nurse Maria Sanchez to be the new head of nursing. The decades of guilt and compromised loyalty seemed to fall away from her, replaced by a fierce, protective sense of purpose. She became my eyes and ears on the floor, a tireless advocate for both the patients and the nursing staff, ensuring the highest standards of care were not just a slogan on the wall, but a daily reality. Her loyalty was no longer to a flawed man, but to the sacred principles he was supposed to represent. And then I made a hire that baffled my new management team. I went back to the Riverside Cafe during a busy morning rush. I sat at the counter and watched Sarah work. I saw her handle a rude, impatient customer with disarming grace, calm a crying child with a kind word, and juggle a dozen complicated orders, all without losing her warm, genuine smile. I saw in her a natural, unteachable empathy and a level of emotional intelligence that was a rare and precious commodity. I offered her a job, not as a receptionist, but as Northwood's first ever patient relations manager. Her entire role was to be the human heart of the clinic, to be an advocate for patients, to listen to their concerns, to solve their problems, to make them feel seen and heard and cared for. Michael, I don't know anything about medicine, she had said, her eyes wide with surprise. I just serve coffee. No, I had told her, my voice firm with certainty. You make people feel welcome. You make them feel safe. In this business, that's more important than any medical degree. I can teach you the terminology. I can't teach you how to have a good heart. She took the job, and she was a natural. Slowly, week by week, the new culture began to breathe. Patients could feel the difference. The intimidating, somber waiting room was redesigned with brighter colors, comfortable chairs, and even a small library. The staff started smiling. They weren't walking on eggshells anymore. The whole building felt lighter, cleaner, more hopeful. The positive reviews started trickling in online, then pouring in. People wrote about the kindness of the nurses, the patience of the doctors, the surprising efficiency of the new systems. They wrote about Sarah by name. About 5 months into this new era, my mother appeared. There was no call, no appointment. She simply walked into the new, bustling Northwood Medical Center waiting room. I saw her on the security feed from my office, and my first instinct was a jolt of pure adrenaline, a primal urge to have her removed. But I held back. I just watched. She didn't ask for me. She just took a seat in a corner, as if trying to be invisible. She picked up one of our new brochures, her expression unreadable. I watched as Sarah, doing her rounds, approached her, offering her a bottle of water and a warm smile, completely unaware that she was speaking to the deposed queen. I saw my mother take the bottle, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. She sat there for 20 minutes, just watching. She saw the calm, professional flow of patients. She saw the easy, respectful interactions between the staff. She saw a well-oiled machine, an enterprise that was compassionate, successful, and thriving. Then she stood, placed the untouched water bottle neatly on a side table, and walked out. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. A text message from her. It was the first direct communication we'd had since the day of the takeover. Contained just 3 words. It looks impressive. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt. But it was something. It was an acknowledgement. It was a crack in the formidable wall of her prideful denial. It was, I knew, the closest I would ever get to a concession of respect from her. And to my own surprise, it was enough. The real validation, the one that truly mattered, arrived a month later in the form of an official email from the city's largest newspaper. Northwood Medical Center had been named the winner of their annual Excellence in Patient Care Award, an honor bestowed based on thousands of anonymous patient surveys and a review by a community board. It was a prestigious award that Carter Medical Group, under my father's celebrated leadership, had never once been nominated for. I printed the email, framed it, and hung it myself in the center of the staff lounge bulletin board. This wasn't my victory to celebrate alone. It was ours. It was Maria's. It was Sarah's. It was for every single nurse, doctor, and administrator who had taken a leap of faith with me. I had started this journey fueled by a desire for revenge. But somewhere along the arduous path, I had stumbled upon a purpose. I hadn't just destroyed my father's corrupt and broken legacy. I had built a better, stronger, and more honest one in its place. One that was truly worthy of respect. The celebration for the Excellence in Patient Care award wasn't held at a sterile hotel ballroom or an exclusive country club. I booked a long table in the private room of a cozy, family-run Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with red and white checkered tablecloths and candle wax artfully dripping down the sides of old Chianti bottles. The guest list was small and exclusive, not by wealth or status, but by trust and shared purpose. Sarah was there, her laughter filling the room as she recounted a story about a grateful elderly patient who had tried to pay his bill with a homemade apple pie. Maria, the formidable head nurse, sat next to her, looking a decade younger and infinitely lighter, sharing a joke with Jennifer, my brilliant bulldog of a lawyer. Even Marcus Sterling, the surgeon, was there, looking almost relaxed in a sweater instead of a suit, actually engaged in a lively debate about vintage cars with David Chun, my loyal COO from my tech company. This was my real board of directors now. This was my true inner circle. As I looked around the table at these people, at their genuinely happy, unguarded faces, I was filled with a profound sense of peace that no stock price or successful acquisition could ever provide. For most of my life, I had been consumed with a desperate, painful craving for a seat at my family's table. A table built on a rotten foundation of secrets, lies, and a love that was entirely conditional. I had been so focused on fighting for my place there that I never realized the infinitely more powerful alternative. I could just build my own table and invite whomever the hell I wanted to sit at it. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a familiar Pavlovian jolt. I pulled it out, assuming it was a work alert. But the message was from an unknown number. It was brief. Congratulations. You deserve it. There was no signature, but I knew with absolute certainty who it was from. Thomas. I stared at the words on the small screen, a complex swirl of emotions passing through me. There was no anger left, not a single drop. No bitterness. Just a quiet, hollow sadness for the brother I never really had. For the man he might have been if he hadn't been smothered by our father's ambition. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a final message from a world I no longer inhabited. My past was still trying to get my attention, but my present, right here in this warm, loud, joyful room, was far too beautiful to look away from. I raised my glass of red wine. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I wasn't ashamed to show. To Northwood, but more importantly to the people who built it. To found family. To found family! They all echoed, their glasses clinking together in a happy, chaotic chorus. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of genuine camaraderie, I finally understood. My father had tried to cast me out, to banish me to a garden of shame and insignificance. But in doing so, he had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life. The freedom to plant my own garden, to choose my own seeds, and to cultivate something new, something honest, and something infinitely better. I was finally, truly free. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between the family you were born into and the person you were meant to become? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.